There's a lot of discussion about best practices in SwiftUI, and to discuss this a little bit better, I would like to give a small coding review on another YouTube tutorial. And this is from Kavsoft with the title SwiftUI 2 Core Data Best Practices. And I guess if you wouldn't have used best practices in the description, I wouldn't have looked so much for best practices. So I have a link to this video in the description box, and we have a look together at the code. He also has on his website the code snippet, so you can just use this one to start off with. I already prepared a project and copied the code from there into this project. If you do this, you have to make sure that you create a project, which I'm just going to show you. So this would be iOS. So when you set up your project, use Core Data. And in this example, we are using SwiftUI to write this application. But also for the lifecycle, just use SwiftUI application because it gives you some nice code snippets. And the one that is especially useful is the persistent file here. This is a good example of how to do dependency injection with core data for SwiftUI, because one of the things you need to work with the preview. And this is not what he did in his video, so I'm not really sure why he didn't do it, because using SwiftUI and not using the preview is really strange. It's one of the things that people really like. So what you see in this persistent controller is that this is actually a singleton pattern. And here in this initializer, we see in memory. This shows you how you can make a in-memory persistent container. And you see here, actually we do that by setting the persistent stores descriptions URL to this def \null. This is the one that he suggested to use also for unit tests. And they set up here so static instance, which they call preview. And they create this from this in-memory store. So this is the one we are going to inject every time we work in the previews. But what you also see here, actually to do here, this is the one that I really wanted to talk about. So here, because when you create this, you have no data in your container. But for example, you want to show a list of, in this example, it's a list of to-dos. And every time you run your preview, you see a brand new container with no data in it. If you want to put something in there, this is the moment to do it here in this preview container. And that's the one I actually, if you create a new one, they use the one item, I think, because in the model file here, I had to add an entity task with two properties, content and date. One of them is string and the other one is date. I'm going to create a couple of tasks in my previous container here. So it's just 10 tasks. When you create a new task, you need to give it the context, setting the date, and just the title for this task. So if you do this, you can use this persistent controller's view context. Just going to save this in your views. So for example, in the content view, here in the preview, in the environment, they did add a property manage object context, but you have to set it because you have to decide what kind of store or file you're going to work with. And in this case, in the preview, I want to have a different one than my actual application. Okay, so now you see here, this is the ones I added in this preview container. So you see all my tasks. They are just dummy data, but that's one thing. For all of your views, you're probably going to add this because, for example, here I use in my home view. Here I do access in my home view the context or the manage object context, but also every time for all the views where you do a fetch request, this is how you access your data with core data, or you access your entities with your core data. This property vector fetch request needs to have a context in the environment, otherwise it doesn't work and you wouldn't see anything. So this was the first thing I wanted to show you. Now we are going to have a look at the what's in this project actually. And this is much nicer because you see now the preview. So in the home under views, here I have a home view. And I do have here a title. Then we have here the case of no results. Then we show you these empty ones, which you don't see right now, because right now I'm using a view context with where I already added items. Okay, so I list of this task, and in order to access them with core data, you need to use this fetch request. In the declaration for this results, you need to say fetch request of what kind of type, and that is task. Because in the documentation, or in the script, the task is missing. Okay, if we go through this code, we see that on the top we have this task in the H stack, and he's using here H stack with a spacer, and I think it's because he doesn't know how to use flexible frames, because I haven't seen him using any flexible frames. Mostly he's using here this UI application chat window first, which is kind of weird. You don't need to do that. Flexible frames is so much easier. So first I'm going to remove this H stack. This is the application. This use case is fine. I'm just going to show you that there's an easier way of doing this. So you can use frame and width and height. This is a fixed value, a fixed frame. But you see the second one with these max width and max height. That's the flexible frames ones. And you can say maximum width is .infinity. And then the second parameter is the alignment. So I can say here leading. So we didn't change anything from the layout. It just made it a little bit more easy. So basically what you're telling is expand the frame of this view to the maximum infinity. So use all the space that there is. And inside of this frame, align it to the leading side. So you can also use the trailing or bottom trailing top side. Okay, then there's the next thing. I want to remove this save area thing, and I realized he's doing this. Just going to remove this line. At the very end, he also adds here a ignore save areas on the top. So I think he just wanted to have this white background also on the top. And you can do this because when you add this white background to this task list, you can also add the address ignore save area here. So the background of this white area is going to be expanded to the very top, but you're still respecting the save area. So this is much nicer than using this 2 lines thing. Then we have this no task here, so which we don't see because I already added stuff. So in case your results array is empty, then you want to show here no tasks. And usually this empty states is better to have in a gray color. So I'm using here gray. And also you see here he's again using 2 spaces because he just wants to have this no task in the middle of the screen. So because I wanted to show you more about this frame, flexible frames, you can use here a frame of maximum width. Again, we say I use the whole space, so infinity, and also maximum height dot infinity, and then alignment. And here the default is center, so you see these values. But you could also use it on top, for example. But we're just going to say place it in the center of the available space. So then we go to the next part, and this is a scroll view with a lazy VStack. And here he uses a VStack in the center. So this is the raw content. And you have a context menu added to each raw. If I run this, so you see now the empty state with our no tasks hint nicely in the center of the screen. If I add here one, I can press on this button. And here in the center there's actually a text field which we don't see, so that we can also add. There's no way a new user would be able to know that they can type here. So this is my next big thing. This is nice. This button was just disabled when I selected this. You can also here select a different tomorrow. I don't like that it is wrapped to the next line, so we can also fix this. Here you have the new date picker style. And actually, since it's a task list, I want to change this so I cannot select the older dates, just the ones in the future. I have to look at this too. And then I can press here add now. And you see this new task coming up. And if you long press on this, you can edit this. So this is bringing this back up. But you also have the possibility to use here delete. And I don't really like to use context menus like this because when I first time I just run the application, I didn't know that I was supposed to long press. But this is a UX design pattern. So this is what you see in this view. We have here this row showing the text and the date. So in this for each, we're looping over all the results, and for each task in this array, we are showing one of these rows, and we show the content of this task and the date of this task. And you see in both cases he had to do this optional handling because the properties of this entity are defined optionally, or they are optional also in the database. So every time you have to handle them, it's quite annoying if you do that in the views. So we can add some syntactic sugar to do this nicely. I should start writing here to-dos. To do, add task date optional helper. So, but I want to go through first all of the things. Then we have here this delete button where we delete this task. And this context menu, when the user presses on edit, the home data changes, has a callback, and actually this call starts with a capital letter function that we shouldn't. So I'm going to just jump to definition, and I'm going to rename this because this is annoying. I mean, it's obviously a tiny misspelling, but functions should never start with a capital letter. So in this edit item, he sets this item that we selected here to the update item. And this actually also toggles the new data view. And so he has here a couple of properties where we store the item that we want to update. And he copies, when you update your item, he copies the date to a date property and the content to a content property, because the user is going to edit a copy of the initial data, and then only if he says update, then we are going to permanently saving it. But also here, this is new data is a property that toggles our sheet, and I don't really like the name, which you see in a minute. So we have now this edit button, then we have the delete button, which in Core Data you just need to say context delete this task. Then we go down, and he did add this plus button here. So he has a Z stack, and he overlays the main view as a V stack with this task title and the list. And he overlays this with this add button, where he toggles this new data property. And if you look down here, he uses a sheet to present his editor, and the is presented has a binding to is new data, and we show this new data view. So first of all, I'm going to rename this just because it's a bit clearer. So the new data view, if you go there. So again, I did add here the preview container. He uses this view to create a new task and to edit the old tasks. So I wouldn't call this new data view. I would call this edit task view. Edit task view. And then in our home, when we present this sheet, this is presented, this property is not is new data, it's the is edit view shown. And I also don't like to have this kind of is this sheet presented in the view model if I don't have to. But I think there's one thing he probably didn't know, so we're going to use this instead. If you go in the home view model and we just cut out these is new data, we are not doing this here anymore, because he did reference it a couple of times, and here where he was just toggling it to remove this, to dismiss this view. So I'm going to delete all of them so we can clean this up. Right now it's just a lot of repeating code. Okay, now I did take this out, and in my home view, I still need to have a binding to my sheet. So I'm going to create here a state property, state private var editor is shown. This is a bool, and in the beginning I say I'm not going to show it. So now down here in my sheet, I'm going to bind this to is editor shown. And then initialize this once when the user presses on this plus button. I'm going to say self.editor is shown.toggle. And then I also need to do this when the user presses on edit. So here in the home data model, I'm still setting the item to the one that we want to edit, but I'm also calling to show this editor. Now I'm able to still go to the editor, but in my editor task view, I need to be able to programmatically dismiss this view. And if you use some of the standard presentation ways like sheets, popovers, model presentations, alerts, for all of these, you have the possibility to dismiss them if you use the environment property for the key path presentation mode. This is var presentation. So we can use this to dismiss this view. So when the user presses on this add now button, wherever that is, here you see home data, write data. Here I still want to save my new data, but I also want to say that presentation mode.wrap value.dismiss. So now this will dismiss this view. So I don't need to handle around the state property. It's a lot more convenient to use this presentation mode, and it makes it also more flexible because then you don't need to handle anything around. So if I press on this plus, I can add something, and then I press on this button and you see it still dismissed this view. This was it for my home view. Now let's have a look at the editor task view. I have here the title. Let's go through one by one. I have here the title, and he's using here again this h-stack with a spacer where you can use a flexible frame. Then we have this text editor, and actually in this view it does have a different color. I'm just going to add here a different background color just to see, because okay, maybe it's just the editor here that didn't correctly show me in the normal one. So, but now you see here this area. Then we go down, we have here this divider, and then we have this when, and here again it's the flexible frame that you could also use. Maybe I just do that because I don't really like to have this nested h-stacks if I don't need to. So this is a frame, max width dot infinity, alignment dot leading. This is the same here for this when. Didn't change much. Then we have here these 3 buttons. And one thing that I don't like is that this tomorrow is wrapped in the next line. He did here define supple, which is a date button. I will look at there in a minute. So just going to continue in this view before we jump there. We have here this add button, and where is it? Yeah, here's, you see here, use the UI screen main bounds -30, and you can also use the same flexible frame, but instead of leading, I'm using center, which is the default value. So it basically didn't change, but this is just more SwiftUI style. Okay, now it's time to go into these 2 buttons here, because I also don't like these buttons too much. So you see this button does get the title today and also the home data, so the view model. Turn to definition. So when you press on one of these buttons, you call home data update with this value, which is the title. If you jump there, you see that here he's comparing the value that you give here to, he's doing string comparisons to today and tomorrow. And since he both uses the string values to couple to the UI to show here and to do the logic, this is quite bad practice, because you might forget that you added this logic and you just say, okay, maybe I want to change this name, or a simple action would be to localize in maybe German or something, or French. And then you would break your project and you would not know because you're using your string values. This is not type safe. This is not a good practice in Swift. So we would need to, instead of using strings to compare and do some logic, we would go for enums, which is much more Swifty. He uses this also for what he wants to display. And actually, if you go back to the date button, the only reason why I'm guessing he did create this subview is because he's trying to share the styling of this background between these two buttons. So he doesn't need to repeat the same view modifiers. If you want to share styles, you can make a subview, but just imagine you're going to build this project for more buttons, and we already had this problem with this, how to update this here. So clearly a subview is not the best idea, and actually they have something much nicer in SwiftUI, and that is you can create your own view modifiers, and you can also create your own button styles. So I'm going to show you this now. We are starting with the view modifier because this gradient I'm going to also use for the button, and we had this plus button here. I want to use the same gradient for this button. So how are we doing this? In my date button file, I'm just going to add this. So this is if you want to create a view modifier, you'll have to use a struct. So this is my gradient background, and we are conforming to view modifier. And when this is a protocol, and what we have to fulfill is a function call, which is here body content. Basically what it gives us is a content. That's what, for example, if you add this view modifier to this text, the content would be this text, but we don't care what it is. It's just some content. But since we have the content, we can now here add whatever we want to. We can add here all the view modifiers that we want. And for ease of use, I'm just going to copy the linear gradient he already defined here. So he has here two gradients. I'm just going to take them out of my body, then you can see them a little bit easier. Because we have here a selected gradient and an unselected gradient. So this is the selected. I'm just going to take all of this and delete unselected. This is all of this. And then we have here a condition if we are selected or not. So this is let is selected. This is bool. And I'm actually not going to define this here in this gradient background because I want to, when I use this background, I want to from outside set this. So now for my background, I can say is selected. If yes, then I'm using my selected. Maybe I should have called this gradient, selected gradient and unselected gradient. I'm using my selected gradient. And if I'm not selected, then I'm using my unselected gradient. Now you see we only have here, the only thing we do here is add one modifier. And we have two cases with two different gradients. But it's already a lot nicer to read than before. Okay, so let's use the background modifier in this example. Here, instead of this background, for my button, I'm saying I'm adding a modifier, which is my gradient background. And here I have the selected condition. And now I need to check what actually the condition was that he used before. And I think it's home data dot check date is equal to title. So this is one thing that I actually still need to take care of. But you already see this is quite nice, and we can also use the same background now for our button, for our plus button. So I go back to my home view, and here for this background, I'm not using Angular anymore. I'm using my modifier gradient background. Now I need to say if it's selected, and I'm using the selected one because I want to have the colored one. So you see I'm using the same gradient on multiple occasions, which is quite nice. But I only need to set it once. Okay, so we go back to our date button because we now so far used one view modifier, but we also can create our own button style. So this is my gradient button style. And similar to view modifier, we are going to use now a button style protocol. This gives us slightly more control. In this case, we have to implement one function, which is make body with configuration. And in the configuration, we can access the label. This is what's shown there. And now you can add again all of your view modifiers. So here I'm going to copy all of the stuff that we wanted. So the font, foreground color, padding. And you already saw that we had here again this condition. That's also, but in both cases we're just going to say is selected. So I'm going to add all of these, and similar to my gradient button, I'm also want to have an initial input value of is selected. So if it's selected and I show white as the foreground color and otherwise gray, and also my background gradient is defined by is selected. So I cannot use here these bold. What you also have if you're using this button style is there's more stuff in this configuration. For example, I could say shadow radius, and I can say in case of is pressed, I show a smaller shadow, like you're pressing inwards. Then if I'm not pressed, now I have this gradient button style and I'm using it here in my button. So I can say here button style, and this is my gradient button style is selected, and this is this condition that we had here. So now all of these stuff I can take out. So just going to, if you want to have this button stretch, you can again use here a my favorite view modifier with flexible frames. Did I use it? No. Okay. Just write it again then. So this is the maximum width dot infinity. Now you see this button is going to expand in this preview. Just add in the preview a padding. You can also say maximum frame of less than that, like 200 or something. What you also can do is to add, if you don't want to see this text wrapping, is add here a fixed size to this label, which means it's not going to be wrapped. So now in your add new task, we have this tomorrow not wrapped in the next line anymore, which is much, much nicer. And we have this interesting shadows. And now that I did add here my gradient button style, there's no need to have this button in an extra view. So I'm just going to cut this out here. And in my home, in my editor task view, when I have here these two buttons, I'm replacing this here, and I'm setting here the today and today. That in this case I'm already unlocking my display name from the one I handled to my backend, which is already a lot better. Still not perfect, but I'm doing the same for my second button. I'm just going to give here different button name. So this helps me a lot, being a lot more flexible with my stylings. So now I want to show you one bug. So if you, for example, say I'm editing this task, but you decide, no, I don't want to finish, and you swipe this down, and you go and want to add a new one, you see that I still have my update task, still the last one I was trying to use. And now this is clearly not what I wanted, so we need to do some cleanup when we leave this view here. And the problem is we still keep reference to the task that we have in there. And I do this cleanup when we press this add now button, but not when I dismiss this view, when I just swipe it down. So first I'm going to, in my home view, because here he does some cleanup when he executes this write data, but I'm not going to do this in this function anymore. I'm creating another one. This is reset. This does not take anything in and anything out. So what this task view actually uses is these three properties here that I need to change or reset. So basically I want to change the updated item, this one, to be nil again. And at the same time I also want to change my content and my data. And they are actually pretty locked. And because of that, I'm going to use here a little bit of combine, because I don't like to do repetitive work. So every time somebody updates my item, I directly want to, so I need to here use unowned self to not create the memory cycle. So every time my item is updated, I also want to change my self.content to be the item's content. And actually this is optionally. If you don't have anything, then send it to an empty string again. And the other one is the date. I'm going to set this to the item's date. And if I don't have anything, then I'm going to set it to today. Like this, I have two cases I take care of directly. Whenever I have an actual item, I'm creating a copy of my content and my date to these two properties. Every time I'm setting my updated item to nil again. I'm also erasing the old values for content and date. Now it's complaining because this thing is unused, which means it actually tells me I need to store my subscription somewhere. So I create here I need to first import combine to make this work. Combine. I'm storing my subscriptions in a set of any cancelable. So we use any cancelable. So the any is type erasing whatever subscription stream I created here. And then I need to store this in my subscription. And the cancelable means that this subscription is automatically cancelled when the init of this view model of this class is called. So we don't need to take care of this. Okay, so what did I want to do? Yes, I had this reset. So basically now it's very easy. I can just say update item is null. And whenever, it's actually pretty simple, but whenever I do this, this stream is called and simultaneously my content and date are also managed. Okay, when we call here this write transaction, he has two cases. One, when the updated item is not null, he copies the edited information to the item. And he does here this cleanup, but we don't do this here anymore. So this is the 3 steps I just used combine for. And then we have here else case, which means we create a new task. So in this case, we create a new task and set the date and content to this task. And then for both of these update task and new task, we need to save the context, which he did here 2 times. One time with try, and one time he used do catch. So I'm just going to, it's because he used your return value. Okay, just going to cut out some of this stuff. And so now it's a little bit cleaner. We either update a item or we create a new one, and then no matter which case, we need to save the context in both cases, so we do a do catch to save this. And since here we saw here edit item, since when I set my updated item to a new item, the date and content are already automatically handled for me. I don't need to do this too. So that's why I like the streams, because I'm just whatever belongs together is automatically updated together. Okay, so now I did create here a reset function, but when do I call it? Because I just took it out from my rewrite data. And when you look back at the editor task view, the moment I want to reset this is when I leave this view. So at the very bottom of my view stack here, I can use a onDisappear and can just say self.homedata.reset. So no matter if I leave this view because somebody pressed the add new button or somebody did the swipe down, every time I reset my data. So I just actually last try. So if I add here something and I decide to leave and I come back, it's clean again. Also, if I go here edit and I don't edit this, I don't finish this editing, and now I create a new task, it's again a blank new add new task editor. So we fixed this bug, which is quite nice. We made our data flow a lot safer by having one moment when we actually do this that fits this purpose the best. This is the onDisappear. Now that I'm here, I realize I haven't actually showed you the optional handling when you do core data stuff. I'm going to add some functions to my entity, my task entity. And since in this model definition file, I can only define my entities and attributes, where do I add functions that I want to give this task entity? And for this, we use extensions. So I'm just going to create here a new group, model extensions. So actually I only have one, but doesn't matter. Usually you would have a lot more. So this is Swift file because I'm extending on my task entity. So this is task, and we use a plus sign to create extensions. And this is helper. Okay, I said I'm extending here core data entity, so I am importing core data. Then I am going to write an extension to my task. What did I want to? So I had here two content and data, and if I call these, they are optional. So what we are going to do is we are creating a second layer on top of these properties, and the original ones that I don't want to use in my views directly, I add here underbar, which reminds me, don't use this in the views. So now everything is going to go plain because we use this content and data in our views. And for this, we are going to create computed properties in our task because computed properties from the end user's point look like properties. So it's perfect for us to calculate something in one place, but the end user would use it as a property. So this is a var content, and this is a string. And the second one is a var date, and this is a date. We have to, for this computed properties, have to handle the get and set cases. So where do I get a content whenever somebody asks for it, and what do I actually set when somebody wants to set content? If somebody wants to get this, I'm returning the underlying value and from my store, which is content underbar. If I don't have anything there, I'm going to return a empty string. And it's just because I have to run this. If somebody wants to set this, I actually want to set is the underlying content underbar to my new value. And I do the same for my date. I have to write here a get, and I'm returning here the underlying value, which is my date underbar. And if I don't have anything, I'm creating a fresh new date, so which is today. And if somebody wants to set this, I'm going to change the underlying value, which is date underbar, to my new value. If you run this now, it knows about the content underbar, but it crashes at one point because here you see key path date not found in entity task. So that's the only thing in your home view. Here, when we created this fetch request, we did say how we wanted to sort this returned array of tasks, and we said we want to sort it by date, but we just changed the name of date to date underbar. And that's why it did not have a key path or a property with a name date. So add a new task, and you see I have this now. We also get a couple of hints. The reason why I actually did this is to simplify the code in our code base. So we saw that here, now it gives me the hints. Here, whenever I want to display the content, I had to handle these optionals, but now I do this in my property wrappers, so this becomes just task.content. And here we just display the task.date. I think there's even one more. So this is a lot nicer to read because we don't really care if this is optional or not. And usually you can add this property wrappers to all of your attributes from your entities that you don't want to handle as an optional. Sometimes you want to have this as an optional, sometimes not. So this is quite nice. So this is a good practice with this core data entities to have these extensions on your entities. So in the extension you can add property wrappers, helper functions for your fetch requests, some things that you would do anyway, like you could have here a function that set as finished, which then would go on and set whatever properties is in this task to be finished. Or you can also create functions here for default entities that you want to see used for your previews, for example. Using these extensions can be super nice with Core Data because of the way we declare our model in these tables. So I just wanted to check if I should change something. If we go back to our home view model, I did clean up here a little bit with this write data, but is not the best, and you can actually create your own enums. So I'm just going to add here an enum because I actually want to just have a formatted date style. So we have a case of today, a case of tomorrow, and a case of other. So now with these events, we can easier compare things than here just comparing with strings. Just need to check when I actually use this. So in our home view, no, I don't think we use it in our home view, only use it in our editor task view. For these 3 buttons. Yes, you see here we have this check to date. So first we're going to work with this update date function, where we are not having the input value of a string, but our enum. Oh, this is this update here on. What did I call it? My formatted date. So this is the formatted date type. Since I have enum, I can use a switch case on the enum on my value. So in case I am in today, in case I am in tomorrow, and in case I am in other. So this is just a nicer way of writing if statements if you have enums to use switch cases. So if I'm in today, I can set my date to the current date. If I'm tomorrow, I'm setting my date to the tomorrow date. Do something. What am I supposed to do? Actually, he doesn't do anything here. This is a break. So now we fixed our problem here with this enums. It's much nicer to read. In case it's today, then set it to this date. So I can save this and we change this in our editor task view. So here, when the user presses on today, we are going to say set this value to today. And if the user presses on tomorrow, I can say set to tomorrow. Just for the nicer reading, I'm going to change this function name here to. So this is the one that is exposed to outside, and this is the one I'm using here. In my editor task view, this changes to 2. So now this reads home data, update date to today. It's like a sentence. So we try in Swift to describe your functions like a sentence, like you would normally talk. So the next point where I want to avoid using string comparisons is here. So you see this button just wants to know if my date is the case today. So check to date is is equal to which formatted date. So I'm just going to go to check date, and I'm renaming this to, so this is command click, rename. Just need to wait until it finds everything. I just want to check something. I want to have a return value. So is date equal to date, and that is my formatted date, and I'm returning here a bool. So I'm just going to comment out everything in here, so we can do that a little bit later. And I return here just for placeholder true, just to see if my naming actually makes sense. I'm going to say my button style is gradient style is selected if my home data is date equal to, and this is my case for tomorrow. So this returns me a Boolean value, so I don't need to have this here. And I need to do the same button style for my other one, for my tomorrow. But in this case, it's selected if my date is equal to today. So now I completely avoided the string comparisons. And we need to write the logic in our isDate equal to. I have now here this, and I just need to know which date I'm actually in. So I need to, from this comparison, create a formatted date that I can compare this to. So this is var selected formatted date. And actually I'm going to rename this to my formatted date. Formatted date, just to have two different names. So this one I'm starting with formatted date dot other. So in this comparison, I'm going to set my selected formatted date to today. If it's tomorrow, then my selected formatted day is tomorrow. And otherwise it's anyway others. So now I have two dates that I can compare. So I'm returning here formatted date that I give here if it's equal to my selected formatted day. Okay, and then the last one here I did use in my home button, which I actually don't use anymore. I'm just going to comment out this date button and the preview. So I can still go here, set, just going to, and also we didn't change this picker style. So in the editor task view, if you have this picker, you have the possibility in the date picker to use a different initializer with a in range selection. So, this is just going to, I need to use something. I want to use something similar. Just need to make sure you use the same one with this. Here, this is the one with title, selection, range, and display components. So I just need to know which position I have to add this in, which is before the display components. So here you have to give a range of dates. And in this case, I'm going to say I start my range with today, and then all the dates that are in the future are allowed. So now when I go here and I try to select a date, you see I cannot select anything from the past, only from the future. And now I can use here my 22, which is tomorrow, and you see here my button updated directly. So the middle one was the one with tomorrow, today, and another, and then none of these two is highlighted. So selected task for third. So you see here I actually did add the correct task with the name that I selected, and I selected, you see also the date that I selected. So this was quite a bit of a rework of this project. There was a couple of things that are just more convenient, like these frames, but some of them are actually making it a lot nicer for larger projects, like when we used this gradient, this button styles. We also fixed one bug in our editor task view by doing the cleanup here on the disappear, and we actually changed something which can be considered bad practice for comparing here string values with each other to do some logic. And it's much better to use enums. Enums are quite important for Swift, and we also use them quite a bit in SwiftUI. So if you have problems with this, just have a look again at the basics of the Swift language. If you work on bigger projects, on real projects, you have to, this is going to be really risky with the string value comparisons. With this, I want to finish. If you like to see this kind of reviews and what are best practices to work with SwiftUI or Core Data, let me know. Write a comment in the comment section. Maybe you have something that you want me to review. Your personal code, I will be also really, really nice, because it's about, I just want to show you how you can improve and where you can go, what you can more explore, what else could you use. Because sometimes it's really difficult with all of the things that you can actually learn. Might it be the Swift programming language, SwiftUI, different features, it's just really difficult. Sometimes you have blind spots. And I just want to point what else you can read more or learn more about. Just give you more options. So if you want me to review some of your projects, or maybe you saw another YouTube tutorial on YouTube that you want me to review, leave a comment in the comment section below. If you liked this review video and you want to see more of this kind, give this video a like. Until next time, happy coding!